Lake Mead is disappearing. Not slowly, not gradually, but at a pace that's making engineers panic and forcing the government to admit what they've been hiding for years. The bathtub ring around the lake is now 180 feet tall. That's a 15-story building worth of missing water. And what's being exposed on the lake bed isn't just dirt and rocks. It's bodies, Nazi artifacts, and evidence of something far worse than anyone expected. Stay with me, because this gets darker than you think. Let's establish some basics first. Lake Mead isn't just some random lake in the desert. It's the largest reservoir in the United States by volume when it's full. And I say when, because it hasn't been full in over 2 decades. This thing was created by the Hoover Dam back in the 1930s, and it's been supplying water to 25 million people across Nevada, Arizona, California, and parts of Mexico. Las Vegas gets 90% of its water from Lake Mead. Let that sink in. A city of 2.2 million people in the middle of a desert depends almost entirely on a lake that's currently at 27% capacity. 27%. That's not a typo. As of late 2024, Lake Mead is holding about 7.4 million acre-feet of water out of its maximum capacity of 26.1 million acre-feet. To put that in perspective, it's lost enough water to fill Lake Erie. Twice. The lake is now at its lowest level since it was first filled in the 1930s, and it's still dropping. Here's where it gets interesting. As the water recedes, it's revealing things that have been hidden for decades. And I'm not talking about old boats and fishing gear. In May 2022, someone was walking along the newly exposed shoreline and found a barrel. Inside that barrel was a body, a decomposed human body that had been there since probably the 1970s or 80s. Based on the clothing and the condition of the remains. And here's the kicker. The person had been shot. This was a murder victim. Mob-style execution. Dumped in a barrel in Lake Mead when the water was high enough that nobody thought it would ever be found. That was just the first one. Since then, they've found at least 5 more sets of human remains in Lake Mead. 5 that we know about. The National Park Service, which manages the area, isn't exactly broadcasting every discovery. Some of the bodies are from recent drownings, people who went missing in boating accidents over the years. But others? They're from decades ago. And the circumstances are suspicious enough that the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department has opened multiple homicide investigations. Las Vegas in the 1970s and 80s wasn't exactly a wholesome family destination. It was mob central. The casinos were run by organized crime families. And when people became problems, they disappeared. Lake Mead was the perfect dumping ground. Deep water, remote locations, and nobody asking questions. The mob knew the water level was high and stable. What they didn't count on was the lake dropping 180 feet and exposing their crimes. But the bodies aren't the most disturbing part. That's just the headline grabber. What's really concerning is what the receding water is revealing about our infrastructure and our future. Let's talk about the intake pipes. Lake Mead supplies water to Las Vegas through intake pipes. Basically giant straws that suck water from the lake and send it to treatment facilities. There are 3 intake pipes. Intake number 1 is now completely above water. Useless. It's been exposed since 2015. Is getting dangerously close to being exposed. It's designed to work down to a lake level of 1,050 feet above sea level. The current lake level is around 1,045 feet. You do the math. We're 5 feet away from the primary water supply for Las Vegas becoming non-functional. They built intake number 3, a 3rd straw, completed in 2015 at a cost of $1.5 billion. This one goes deeper, designed to work down to 895 feet. That gives them some breathing room. But here's the problem. If the lake drops below 895 feet, Las Vegas has no water. 0. And at the current rate of decline, that's not a question of if. It's a question of when. The Southern Nevada Water Authority isn't panicking publicly, but behind closed doors they're implementing water restrictions that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Las Vegas has already banned decorative grass. Not discouraged it, banned it. Those lush green lawns you see in front of casinos and homes? Going away. They're paying people to rip out grass and replace it with desert landscaping. They've implemented water budgets for every residence and business. Go over your budget and the fines are astronomical. But here's what nobody is talking about publicly. The projections. If you dig into the Bureau of Reclamation's data, the federal agency that manages Lake Mead, their models show scenarios where the lake could hit dead pool within 10 to 15 years. Dead pool is the level where water can't flow through the Hoover Dam anymore. Not only does Las Vegas lose water, but the hydroelectric power generation stops. Hoover Dam provides power to 1.3 million people across Nevada, Arizona, and California. That goes to zero at dead pool. The official word from the Bureau of Reclamation is that they're working on solutions, that the situation is manageable, that they've dealt with droughts before. What they're not saying out loud is that this isn't a drought. This is the new normal. Climate scientists have been screaming about this for years. The Colorado River Basin, which feeds Lake Mead, is in a megadrought. Not a multi-year drought, a multi-decade megadrought that might actually be a permanent shift in climate patterns. The Colorado River hasn't reached the ocean since 1998. Think about that. A river that used to flow 1,450 miles from the Rocky Mountains to the Gulf of California hasn't completed that journey in over 25 years. It gets tapped out long before it gets there. Here's a number that should terrify everyone. The Colorado River Basin is allocated to provide 16.5 million acre-feet of water per year to the states that depend on it. That's what the Colorado River Compact, signed in 1922, promises. The problem? The river hasn't produced 16.5 million acre-feet in decades. On average, it's producing about 12 to 13 million acre-feet. They're overallocated by about 25%. They've been making up the difference by draining Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the two big reservoirs. But now those reservoirs are nearly empty, and there's no buffer left. Let's talk about what's being exposed beyond bodies and intake pipes. The receding water is revealing the original landscape that was flooded when the dam was built. Towns, roads, structures that have been underwater for 90 years are seeing daylight again. There's a whole town called St. Thomas that's been underwater since 1938. As the water dropped, the ruins started appearing. Foundations, walls, remnants of buildings. It's become a tourist attraction. People hike out to the ghost town to take pictures. It's eerie and fascinating and deeply unsettling, because it's visual proof of how much water is gone. But there's darker stuff too. In 2022, someone found what appeared to be Nazi artifacts near the lake. A German helmet, military items from World War II. The theory is that they came from a yacht that sank in the lake decades ago. The yacht belonged to someone who had fled Europe after the war, allegedly a Nazi sympathizer who brought items with them. The National Park Service collected the artifacts and confirmed they were authentic. It's a bizarre historical footnote, but it speaks to the kinds of things that get dumped in lakes and stay hidden until the water disappears. The environmental impact of the dropping water level is catastrophic. Lake Mead is home to dozens of species of fish, birds, and other wildlife that depend on the lake ecosystem. As the water drops, the ecosystem collapses. Birds that nest along the shoreline are losing habitat. The lake's marinas are already struggling. Some have had to close because the water is too far from the docks. They can't move the docks fast enough to keep up with the receding shoreline. And then there's the economic impact. Lake Mead and the surrounding area generate about $300 million a year in tourism revenue. Boating, fishing, camping, recreational activities. As the lake shrinks, that revenue drops. Marinas close. Tour operators go out of business. Jobs disappear. The communities around Lake Mead, places like Boulder City and Overton, are watching their economies collapse in real time. Agriculture is getting hit too. The Colorado River Basin supplies water to some of the most productive farmland in the United States. California's Imperial Valley produces vegetables for the entire country, lettuce, and hay. All of it depends on Colorado River water. As the water allocations get cut, farmers have to make impossible choices. Do they let fields go fallow? Do they switch to less water-intensive crops that are less profitable? Do they drill wells and pull from groundwater, which is also depleting? There's no good answer. The Imperial Irrigation District in California has water rights that date back over a century. They're considered senior rights, meaning they get water before almost anyone else. But even they're facing cuts now. In 2023, the federal government told them they need to reduce water use by 15%. That's hundreds of thousands of acre-feet of water that's just gone from the agricultural system. Farms that have been operating for generations are shutting down. It's not making headlines the way it should, but it's happening. Here's where it gets political. 7 states share Colorado River water through a series of agreements and compacts that were written in the 1920s. Back then, they thought the river produced way more water than it actually does. They allocated more water than actually exists. For decades, this worked because Lake Mead and Lake Powell acted as buffers. But now the buffers are gone, and the states are fighting over scraps. California, Arizona, and Nevada are the lower basin states. They've been told they need to cut their water use dramatically. California is the biggest user. They get 4.4 million acre-feet per year. Arizona gets 2.8 million. Nevada gets 300,000, which sounds small, but remember, almost all of it goes to Las Vegas. The negotiations over water cuts have been brutal. States are suing each other. Cities are suing states. Native American tribes who have senior water rights that predate all the state agreements are asserting their claims. It's a legal mess that's going to take decades to sort out. And in the meantime, the lake keeps dropping. There's also the international dimension. Mexico is entitled to 1.5 million acre-feet of Colorado River water per year under a 1944 treaty. The United States has to deliver that water or face international consequences. But as the system runs dry, how do you honor that commitment? The answer so far has been to cut everyone's allocation equally, including Mexico's. That's causing diplomatic tensions that aren't getting better. Now let's talk about solutions. Because surely someone has a plan, right? The official strategy involves a few things. First, conservation. Use less water. We've already talked about the grass bans and water budgets in Las Vegas. That's being expanded across the basin. Cities are paying people to replace toilets with low-flow models, to install drip irrigation, to rip out swimming pools. Second, water recycling. Las Vegas is actually a leader in this. They treat wastewater and pump it back into Lake Mead, where it gets treated again and reused. They've gotten incredibly efficient at this. They claim they recycle about 40% of the water they use. But there are limits to how much you can recycle. And it doesn't solve the fundamental problem that there's not enough water coming in. Third, and this is where it gets expensive, desalination. The idea is to build plants on the California coast that turn seawater into fresh water, then pump it inland to the cities that need it. Sounds great, except desalination is incredibly energy-intensive and expensive. It costs about $2,000 per acre-foot to desalinate water, compared to maybe $200 per acre-foot for traditional sources. Who's paying for that? And where's the energy coming from? If Hoover Dam stops generating power, that's even more of a problem. There's also cloud seeding. The idea of making it rain more by shooting chemicals into clouds. Some states are experimenting with this. The results are mixed at best. There's a proposal to build a pipeline from the Great Lakes to the Colorado River Basin. The Great Lakes contain 20% of the world's fresh water. Surely they can spare some for the Southwest, right? Except the Great Lakes states and Canada have laws preventing bulk water removal. They see their water as a precious resource. They're not sharing. And even if they agreed, we're talking about a pipeline over 1,000 miles long that would cost hundreds of billions of dollars. It's not happening anytime soon. Here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in government wants to say out loud. The Southwest United States was probably never meant to support this many people. Los Angeles, Phoenix, Las Vegas, these are cities built in deserts. They exist because of engineering projects like the Hoover Dam and the Colorado River Aqueduct that brought water from far away. The climate has changed. The rivers are smaller, and there are way more people now than when these systems were designed. Phoenix is a city of 1.7 million people in one of the hottest, driest places in North America. It shouldn't exist at the scale it does. Las Vegas is even more absurd. A city of 2.2 million people in the Mojave Desert, where the average annual rainfall is 4 inches. That's less than the Sahara Desert in some years. Exposed lake bed that used to be underwater. Dead marinas sitting on dry land miles from water. And the scary part is that Lake Mead is just the canary in the coal mine. This is happening to water sources all over the world. The Aralai Sea in Central Asia has almost completely disappeared. It was once the 4th largest lake in the world. Now it's mostly desert. The Dead Sea is shrinking by about 3 feet per year. Lake Chad in Africa has lost 90% of its volume since the 1960s. Water systems are collapsing globally, and Lake Mead is just the American version of a worldwide crisis. The bodies being found in Lake Mead make for sensational headlines. They're disturbing, they're fascinating, and they grab attention, but they're distractions from the real story. The real story is that the infrastructure supporting 40 million people is failing, and nobody has a solution that doesn't involve massive expense, lifestyle changes, or both. The video footage and images coming out of Lake Mead, the white bathtub ring visible from space, the exposed ruins, the barrels with bodies, all of it is showing us a truth that's hard to accept. The way we've been living isn't sustainable. The water isn't coming back. The snow in the Rockies that feeds the Colorado River is falling less each year. The temperatures are rising, which means more evaporation. The demand keeps increasing as populations grow. It's a math problem with no good solution. Some people are already leaving. Real estate prices in Las Vegas and Phoenix held up during the 2020s. But analysts are predicting that as water problems become more acute, people will start moving to regions with more stable water supplies. The Great Lakes region, the Pacific Northwest, places where water isn't a crisis. It's not happening overnight, but it's starting. Companies are making location decisions based on water availability. Industries that require lots of water are avoiding the Southwest. The footage from Lake Mead is a warning. It's showing us what happens when we ignore natural limits, when we build cities in places that can't sustain them, when we assume resources will always be available. Just 25 years later, it's at 27% capacity. That's how fast things can change. And it's speeding up. The disturbing truth isn't the bodies or the Nazi artifacts or the ghost towns. The disturbing truth is that Lake Mead is dying, and millions of people depend on it. And there's no easy fix. The systems we built are breaking down. The climate we designed for doesn't exist anymore. And the footage we're seeing now is just the beginning. As the water keeps dropping, more will be revealed. More problems. More evidence of how precarious our situation is. The Bureau of Reclamation keeps releasing reports saying they're managing the situation, that they have plans and contingencies. But their own models show scenarios where Lake Mead becomes essentially unusable within a generation. That's not ancient history. That's our lifetime. People making decisions today about where to live, where to work, where to raise families, they need to be looking at this data. Because what's happening at Lake Mead is a preview of what's coming to water systems across the American West. The footage is disturbing because it's real. It's not theoretical. It's not a worst-case scenario that might happen someday. It's happening right now. Lake Mead will be lower than it was when this script was written. That's how fast it's moving. And nobody seems to have an answer that doesn't involve massive disruption to how we live. So yeah, the footage from Lake Mead reveals a disturbing truth. But it's not about what's in the lake. It's about what's not in the lake anymore. And what that means for the 40 million people who depend on water that isn't there. Thanks for watching. If this kind of content interests you, subscribe for more.